Okay, so in Maya, what we'll do is we'll just export all of this as one big FBX, just to be able to see it all in Unreal and kind of start getting a feel for it. This is something that we'll not end up actually using towards the end of our project. Like we will actually replace all of this for individual assets in the editor. So we will have like an individual boat asset, individual vase, probably split off kind of the temple entrance and kind of think of what assets we need. But usually I like just starting off with having everything in one file, and then I can start thinking of what I need for my scene, because it's not always easy to figure out up front what you want to be separated and what you want to be together and what kind of models you actually need. So usually I like just iterating in Maya really quickly. And then once I figure out what I actually need for my scene, then I start splitting off assets that I bring into Unreal individually. So for now, we'll just export all of this. It's just on our file export selection. You can also add this to your custom shelf by just Control-Shift clicking. And then we'll just bring this into Unreal. So something to think about here is your folder structure. It's always good to kind of keep things consistent as far as folder structures go, of course, just so you know where to find all of your stuff. For Unreal, I like to do it in a somewhat specific way. So what I like to do is I like to mirror my Unreal folder structure with my raw and FBX file structure. So basically wherever my FBXs are lines up with wherever the Unreal files are. So if we go into the content browser in Unreal, I'm just going to dock this in my layout so it doesn't pop up and down constantly. There we go. There is some folders already. Usually I like creating my own and just putting everything in there just so I don't convolute the whole structure. Like we might accidentally, or it might get a little bit confusing with what's your meshes and what's coming from other places. So usually I just make my own folder here. I'm just going to call this as learning art. Could be anything really. Sometimes I'll just call it art or something, but what you might find is if you grab things from the marketplace or something, like Unreal Marketplace or other places that you bring into your project, they might have folder structures that match your names. And if that does happen, then you would obviously have their files as well as your files in that folder. So by giving a slightly more unique name, we'll make sure that none of that will happen. And then in here, usually what I like to do is similar to what they've done for all the starter content and stuff, is having separate folders for materials, textures, objects and stuff. So what I'm just going to do for now is I'm going to make a blockout folder, because a blockout is just going to be completely separate from the actual final assets in art. So I'm going to make a specific folder for our blockout. Okay, so I'll just use that just for the blockout, and then what we can do is we can show this in Explorer. And this will show you the actual hard drive location. So this is currently on my D drive in ArtStation Learning, Unreal Project, ArtStation Learning Environment. It's a bit of a long string, but basically what I like to do, so this is my actual Unreal project, right? It's a U project, and there's all the content here. So what I like to do is I like to save all of my FBXs either in a folder in here or just outside of it, just so I don't mess with their structure. So I'm going to go one step back, and I'm going to create a new folder here, and this is where we'll save all of our FBXs to, and textures and stuff in the future as well. So I'm going to call it ArtStation Learning Enviro, and we can do raw or source is common, or kind of common names for this stuff. I'm going to go with source in this case. Source art meaning that that's where, you know, the actual source art is coming from. So like the FBXs and the textures and stuff that are not actual Unreal files. And then what I like to do here is I like to mimic this whole structure. So we got content, ArtStation Learning Art, blockout. So I'm going to make an ArtStation Learning Art folder. And we'll just mimic that entire folder structure so that whenever we are looking for our source art, we know exactly where to find it. So I'm not going to copy this whole string. In Maya, I'm going to paste that. And I'm just going to call it blockout 01. I always like having a number in there just so you can save off multiple iterations. So we can do a version 2, version 3, and keep on going with that. So just going to call it that for now. And the basic FBX settings should be fine. I shouldn't really have to change anything there. So I'm just going to go with that. And I'm going to go export selection. Done. And now we're going to jump into Unreal and we're going to import. Okay, so now I can just paste this whole string again. And we've got our blockout FBX. So click open. Okay. So since we are in Unreal Engine 5, in almost every case, I would recommend just turning on build Nanite. Nanite is like the new geometry technology that I've added in UE5, which is just very efficient for rendering high poly meshes and stuff. And just having this on for basically every object in your scene will just make that a more consistent cost in terms of performance. So for most geometry, if you're not planning to animate it or do anything crazy with it, just building Nanite is a good way to go about it. Now, in Maya, we've got a whole bunch of separate meshes, right? Like these are all separated into different little things. I'm going to want to not have all of those show up as separate things in Unreal. Oh, actually, I just realized I'm actually importing this into the wrong folder right now. So I'm going to actually cancel this for now. We're going to jump into our blockout folder and import into there. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to enable combine meshes. If you don't enable this, it will actually import all of these objects as separate assets in Unreal Engine, which can be useful in some cases. You know, if you want to just quickly have like a whole set of vases or something, you can just have them all in there, export them all as one FBX. But usually I find it's safer to just have an individual FBX for every object you want to import in Unreal Engine, just to make it easier to go back and tweak specific ones. So in this case, for this whole blockout, I definitely want all of that to be combined so that we can just, so we just place one extra in Unreal Engine instead of having all of this mess of 100 different things. So I'm going to enable combine meshes. Other than that, I'm just going to stick to the basic settings, I think. I don't think we really need anything else. One thing we might want to disable actually is create new materials here. We're going to make our own material and apply it anyway. So usually I like just turn this off entirely, just so I can apply my own stuff. I also don't really want to import textures. If I have that on, maybe it would import all the stuff that comes with the trees we made. I don't really want any of that clutter in Unreal Engine, so I'm just going to turn that off as well. And the rest should be okay. Sweet, so it's going to hit import all, making sure that combine meshes is on. And it'll take a quick little second here. Importing, generating our Nanite geometry as well. And there we go. So I'm just going to drag and drop this right into my scene here. And there we go. So that's looking decent. Gives us a good scale reference. It's nice having the Unreal lighting and stuff on there. It makes it feel very different from what we were looking at in Maya. That's pretty sweet. Now in here, we can click, like just right click anywhere like we did before and click play from here. It's not going to work right away because currently there's very likely some pretty bad collision on this. Collision is something we won't worry about too much, but as you can see, if we go to player collision, this is basically what we would collide with if we're walking. So inside here, actually it might be an error. Practically there's no collision on any of that. This is the collision box of the object we just imported. So what I'm going to do, since this is a blockout, I'm going to enable a more complex form of collision, just so that we can actually walk on it. So right here, if we scroll way down, there's this collision tab. We can change that to use complex collision as simple. So that basically makes it so that every single face has collision on our mesh. So it's pretty expensive. It's not something you would ever want to ship your game with. I think this player collision view is actually broken right now. Not sure what's going on there. But now we should be able to right click, play from here, and we can walk on it. Sweet, so that gives us a pretty decent starting point. So I'm just gonna close this out again. So this is me opening the static mesh. Okay, now we are missing the water, which we were missing in Maya as well. We might want to bring that back soon. But other than that, there's not too much else we need to do in Unreal Engine for now. We can just kind of have a look at it, maybe set some camera viewports. One thing I like to do is it's always good to kind of figure out your composition early on, right? It's like, what kind of camera shots do I want to go for? And then you can kind of start set dressing accordingly to make sure those shots look as awesome as possible. So I like just setting a couple camera shots usually, just so I can kind of focus on that and make sure that composition looks good. So say if I kind of like this camera angle, for instance, there's actual bookmarks you can set. There's shortcuts for this, but basically there's a total of 10 bookmarks you can set. And as you can see, the shortcuts currently are Ctrl+1, Ctrl+2, and basically every single number on the keyboard. So what we can do is, if I like this camera angle, we can press Ctrl+1 on the keyboard. And if I like a different camera angle as well, like maybe here, and press Ctrl+2, you can set a preset for every single number on the keyboard. So now if I fly elsewhere and I click 1, it takes me right back to that bookmark. If I click 2, it takes me to this bookmark. So that's usually a nice way to kind of set up some camera compositions that you like early on. So I'm gonna go for Ctrl+3 over here, a bit of a close-up. Just kind of always keeping the rule of third in mind. That's usually something I like kind of going for. If you're not aware of the rule of thirds, there is, just forget where it is for a second. I think if we switch to the cinematic viewport, this allows you to use these composition overlays. So we can use the grid 3x3 to figure out where the rule of thirds kind of align. So basically, the idea being that the area of focus would be along these points. So in this case, you know, the first shot I said, if I click 1, it's actually perfectly aligned. So this is pressing 1 on the keyboard. The boat appears to be right on this dot, and the entrance is right here. So it's kind of actually pretty pleasant composition overall. It doesn't have to align perfectly, of course, but it's just for a really basic composition, that's usually a decent starting point to get a somewhat interesting looking shot. I'm gonna go back to just default viewport. Okay, so I got a couple of bookmarks. I might want to apply some basic materials to this as well. I'm going to create my own really basic blockout material that pretty much has nothing in there. I'm going to call it MM actually. MM standing for master material. It's usually a naming convention I like to use. I think Epic still uses as well. So we would use MM for the actual shaded graphs, and then we use MI standing for material instances for all the instances we might create later. So I'm going to call this MI or MM blockout. And in here, I'm going to hold V and left click on the mouse to create this vector4 parameter. I'm going to call this color. I'm going to give this a basic white color for now. Actually, I'm going to make it slightly darker, because if we make it pure white, it's kind of outside of a realistic range. Like, it's going to bounce off so much lighting that it might be a little bit too intense. I'm going to dial it back just a little bit. I'm going to just plug that in. And I don't really care too much about roughness and all of the other stuff for now. I just want something in there. So basically, if we apply this, we just get this white material, of course. We can apply that to all the different things. But because this is an actual graph with a parameter, which we can also make from here, there's all these, instead of using the shortcut we did, there's like a constant vor vector and stuff. You could just drag it in, convert it to a parameter. It's the same as holding 4 and left clicking. It's a shortcut for that. And the reason we're making it a parameter is so that we can tune this value per instance. So say if I So let's make a roughness one. So say if this is like our roughness input. I'm going to set it 0.8, so it just has a little bit of shine to it, but not much. I'm going to save that. So now I'm going to make a material instance by right-clicking this material. And I go mi block out green, for instance. We can change the color, because that one is a parameter. But we cannot change the roughness at the moment, because that one is not a parameter. So that's where parameters come in handy. It allows you to change it per instance. So now I can use this instance for the leaves, for instance, and now those are slightly green. May not be something you necessarily want in a block out, but here and there I like to play around with some subtle colors like that. It can be nice to have. I'm going to, yeah, so basically right now this is not a parameter, so I'm going to right click this one as well and convert to parameter and call it roughness. We can hold S or left click to make a scalar parameter as well, so that gives us the same thing. I'm going to save that. So now per material instance, we can also change the roughness. If I wanted it to be like super shiny. I actually don't see too much of it because there's not too much to reflect, but we can see there's like quite a bit of reflections coming off of it. But I'm going to keep it at 0.8 for all my materials. If you leave this unchecked here, it means that it will always look at its parent. So with this unchecked, even if I had this set to 0, if I uncheck this, it's going to go back to whatever the value of the parent is. And the value of the parent right now is 0.8. So if you do a lot of instancing, it's usually a good idea to make sure these are unchecked so that it just keeps referring back to the parent material. Cool. So that kind of gives us a basic idea of what things look like. I'm going to add some water in here as well. I'm just going to make that a plane for now. So we can just go in here, or actually under create shapes, add a plane. It's not going to be anything fancy for now. I'm just going to put that in there. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this. So I just press the Control W there. I'm going to call this block out water. Now by default we cannot touch the opacity, so we'll have to change our blend mode to be a translucent material. Now by default we can't adjust roughness and stuff on a translucent material, so what we will also want to do is to scroll down here and change our lighting mode. These are kind of different ways it can be shaded. But default sets a volumetric non-directional, which is pretty cheap, but it doesn't give us a whole lot of control. If we switch it to one of the more expensive ones, like the ones down here, surface translucent volume or surface forward shading, we can use some of the other features. So this one here is super expensive, but looks pretty, so I'm gonna just go with that for now. Now I'm going to hold S and left click to make a new parameter, call this opacity. Let's just go with some 0.3 or something. Plug that in there. And since it's water, let's make it a little bluish. I'm not going to make it actually look like water just yet. This is just like a placeholder block out material. Just to get a quick feel for it. Don't know why it's taking so long to save, but yeah, so I'll put that in there. So I'm just going to drag and drop that on. There we go. Get some translucent water. I'm going to make that shiny. We won't see too much of. I'll make it a little bit more opaque. It's a little bit hard to see right now. Cool. Close that. Yep, save the changes. Right now I am able to select it. Sometimes you might find that you just cannot click on a translucent surface. You just can't select it. This is because Unreal Engine actually has a toggle to be able to select translucent surfaces or to click through them, which is actually pretty useful because in cases where you have like smoke cards and all these kind of different layers of opacity, you may not want to be selecting those. You might want to select things behind them. So there's a toggle for it by pressing T on the keyboard. So if I press T and now I try and click it, I can select it. If I press T again, now I just can't select it anymore. So if you ever find yourself not being able to select a translucent surface, that would probably be why. Sweet. So it's going to make that pretty big for now, so it just kind of fills up this whole space. It's going to be replaced at some point anyways, but this gives us a basic idea of things here. Cool. So next up, I think what we'll look at is bringing in a couple of Megascans assets to start blocking in some rocks and stuff. I did just make one little change here. When I originally placed this, I just kind of dragged it into a random spot, which meant it wasn't really aligned with anything in the world. I just moved it to 0, 0, 0, just so it perfectly aligns with where it's placed in Maya. Just for convenience sake, if we do want to bring stuff from Unreal Engine to Maya, it's all going to line up. So yeah, let's look at Megascan stuff. Also, I would recommend saving your scene if you haven't already. I just did that. I just wanted to save current level as, and I just made a new levels folder within my Artificial Learning Art folder here. So that's where I'll keep all of my levels. Usually I like having that numbered as well, so I can save off iterations if I want to. It's like having old versions laying around sometimes to refer back to. Cool. So as far as Megascans goes, they've integrated really, really nicely in Unreal Engine 5. If we just go into the Content tab here, there is a Quixel Bridge button that will just take us straight to the library. As you can see, I did just do a test download, but you should just be able to log into your Epic account and you'll get access to this whole library of awesome Megascan stuff. So yeah, lots and lots of cool stuff. There's some new rocks, which is cool. They actually fit my scene pretty well. If we just go rock, we can of course find a whole bunch of different ones. In this case, I mostly care about the meshes, because I'll only be using these for blockout purposes right now. So I'm not going to go into too much detail or anything. I just want something to quickly populate some of the space without having to go into Maya and hand model a bunch of stuff. It's just a little bit quicker that way sometimes. So I'm just going to select this one. You could practically drag and drop it right into your scene. Personally, I usually do prefer using the actual download button. Before we do, we should also choose what quality we want, and I do want to go with Nanite. Have it be super high poly, and just really focus on hitting a nice and high quality bar here. So I'm going to hit download, because if I want me to drag and drop, it's a little bit inconsistent in terms of how long loading times and stuff take before the full resolution one shows up. So this just gives me a bit of a clearer idea of just having the actual final version of the mesh there right away. So after I download it, we can just hit add, and that will add it to our project. Usually it browses straight to the folder, but in this case it didn't, but it will make a Megascans folder, and it should live right here. There we go. It's probably generating the Nanite mesh right now. If I try and drag and drop this right now, it's probably going to load for a little bit. And now I'll just kind of continue blocking out with that. So again, we're not going to go and make a super detailed scene right away. So the only thing we really care about is kind of the overall composition of our scene. Just making sure everything feels nice together in terms of shapes. Like all I care about is the shapes for now. Materials don't really matter. Details don't matter. We just want all large shapes, especially like we can still see on my current blockout, of course. There's not a whole lot of detail in there, and I won't add any more detail to this blockout really. Like this is enough for me to see kind of what needs to be there in the final version. And that's usually all I really do with the blockout, is just push it far enough to give myself a clear idea of what everything is, and then can start working on more final art later. So this rock is actually really, really massive. For now, I'm just going to use the scaled down version. For final art, we probably don't want to scale too much, because it's going to be disproportionate to realistic proportions, but just for blockout purposes, I will just do this for now, just to quickly get some shapes in there. So I'm just going to hold Alt to duplicate this, put some on both sides. Let's get a nice and basic feel for all of this. I'm just going to reuse the same rock for everything for now. Okay, it doesn't have back faces, so I'm just going to have to kind of clash this in there. Of course, for the final art, we'll have a bunch of rock variation. You could download a couple other ones if you do want some other silhouettes to start playing with. But for now, I'm just going to stick to this one and just really quickly block in the overall scene here. Fill in some of the gaps so it starts feeling a bit more of an actual scene. Now I could look at our camera positions, of course, and kind of see how things align. It feels like a bit of an awkward gap, and it's up right there right now, so I want to push that out a little bit. We might need to do another duplicate here. Just gonna tie that in nicely. Rotate a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time on this right now because it's almost guaranteed going to change. Like organic stuff usually shifts around a lot as you work on your scene. So I do expect a lot of this to change later on. I kind of clash it in there maybe. So it doesn't look too amazing yet, but at least, you know, some of the blanks are kind of filled in, so I start getting a bit more of a sense of the actual scene. Overall, this is feeling far too wide at the moment as well. So now let's bring this in a bunch closer. Yeah, it feels better. Don't want to hide all tree though, but yeah, I do like it being a little closer together. Nice and cozy little space. Cool. Maybe I can just bring in some larger kind of background stuff there. All right. So yeah, I just kind of like doing this sometimes just to quickly get some shapes in there that would otherwise be pretty time consuming to model in Maya potentially, like all these organic kind of shapes. So Mexicans can definitely be pretty useful in that blockout stage there already. Or sometimes, you know, if you don't want to create too much art by hand, some of it can actually be used as final art as well. Like if there is stuff you need for your scene, you can just straight up use that. I would be careful not to hold yourself back too much. So like if you are trying to reach a specific look, you don't want to hold yourself back with just the Mexicans library, of course. Like there's more you can do on your own as well. But it's definitely a good place to kind of start blocking some stuff in, and a good place to use some stuff if you do feel like it's a perfect fit for your scene. The cool thing is we can actually bring low poly versions of these back into Maya as well to see exactly where they're placed, which can be quite useful. Like if we're blocking things out and we kind of need to know where this rock is so that we can have other meshes that kind of take that into account and we kind of model it around that positioning, can be pretty useful. So what we can do is we can literally select all of the meshes we've placed in Unreal Engine, which is this water plane we did, as well as all these rocks in the outliner. It's a little bit easier to select in here. So I'm gonna select all of these. We could also put this in a folder. Might as well actually just clean up our outliner a little bit. So we can just right click it and we can just move these to a new folder. I think it might be off the screen, sorry about that. So move that to a new folder. Mexicans block out. And I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to select the water plane. I'm just going to go File, Export Selected. And currently it's looking at our project location. Again, we made our source location. I'm just going to overwrite this test I did here. So I'm just going to call it Blockout Unreal Reference. Naming here doesn't really matter, but that way I know this is kind of my Unreal export. Actually, I might just call it that, Unreal Export, just so I know this one is coming from Unreal, because I don't want to bring that back into Unreal. Yep, just gonna keep the default settings. So in Maya, we can just drag and drop it in now. Whoops, it's the export one, my bad. So we should be able to drag and drop this. And there we go, that's all of the proxy versions of our rocks. It's a pretty smart thing that Nanite does. is when you export something from Unreal, even though it's basically probably millions of firsts that I have here already. If we go into NetEd visualization triangles, you can see there's a lot of triangles. But when you export an object like this, it actually exports a super low poly proxy version of it, which I think gets used for some collision parts in Unreal Engine, as well as I think it gets used for the bounce lighting that comes from Lumen. So this exports a super low poly version of the mesh, which is actually nice for Maya because it keeps the scene pretty fast. It does have some pretty ugly normals, so we could try and maybe unlock those. That's a lot better. And here, I don't know what's going on here. It's all black. Oh, it exported a collision mesh as well as the actual mesh. So we can see there's the actual mesh and there's the UCX. We can just delete the UCX. It's just for collision. Cool. So there we go. Now we have some nice reference. So if we wanted to like model some more specific stuff, or just for general reference when we're modeling our block out, it's nice to have that in there. Sweet. So I would just continue iterating on this until I'm happy with the composition overall, how everything feels, and just trying to make myself happy with all the different things we have in the scene, making sure it feels good compositionally, size-wise, and yeah, just trying to get to a good point. And then once I am happy with everything, we will start splitting off individual assets, such as the boat, the entrance, the vase, maybe the stairs is one asset or a couple separate ones. And then we'll just export all of those as separate things so that we can place those individually, as well as when they actually get worked on and finished up, they will automatically update once we like re-import it. They'll still be placed in position, but we'll just have the final art being swapped in. So that's a really good way to basically build this more proper, because we don't want to keep any of this block out stuff in there in the end. All of this will be replaced for proper objects. But yeah, so this is usually my first step, is I like doing in Maya just to quickly iterate, and then we start replacing it for proper assets.